Hey, Tom, welcome to my podcast. I'm excited to have you today. I want to introduce everybody to you. I've known you for a couple of years, and you've been my kind of like my mentor in a way.
Uh-huh.
I remember our conversation and all the notes I made and took it down.
Yeah.
And you are a diverse consultant, and you're moving into something I never imagined I'd have a conversation about conscious aging. And I would love
Mm,
to give you the floor to share what is conscious aging. Do tell us.
indeed. Well, great pleasure for me to be here with you, Kirti. So thank you for the invitation to speak to you about this. And yes, I have been a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant now for the last 30 years.
Wow.
And one can argue that generational diversity, age differences, of course, are a part of diversity. But conscious aging in itself is specifically around looking at how do we go through the stages of aging. So if you think about defining aging is the natural process of getting older.
Mm-hmm.
Conscious is being aware of our external and internal environments. So if you put them together, conscious aging is being aware of what's happening externally in the world and also internally within me as an individual, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, because all these things shift as we become older.
What got you into this?
Ah,
Because you went from
I
you
was
said I was diversity consultant and now. So it feels like there's
No, I still do diversity, but this has been for the last 5 years a growing passion of mine, which has become more and more important for me. So about 5 years ago, I was turning 59, and I had. I'm of Indian ethnicity, born and brought up in Malaysia, and in the Indian culture, turning 60 is a seminal stage. It's really that beginning of the age of renunciation.
yeah.
And even though it was all in the background, I never paid a lot of attention to those cultural messaging. I found myself at 59 having some existential questions around what is the next stage of my life going to look like? As I turn 60, how do I embark on this next stage of my life? What does it mean to be an elder? How do I give back? How much more time do I have left on the planet? How do I make the most? So these are the bigger types of questions. So I found myself with those questions at the age of 59. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who introduced me to this concept of conscious aging. And then, as is my style of learning, I read about it. I started talking to people about it. I attended quite a number of different courses on it, webinars, some seminars, some live workshops, and then started myself just becoming more and more interested in it.
59. Do you know a lot of women start feeling like that in their 40s?
Yes, yes. So, we talk a lot around the milestone birthdays, so
Yeah.
30, 40, 50, etc.
Mm-hmm.
In actual fact, I think the existential questions occur the year before, 39. 49.
Yeah. I actually had an existential crisis at 39, funny
There
enough.
you go. See, and because that's when you're entering that period, And Carl Jung, the Austrian psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, I mean, he put it so well. He said, I love his quote. He said, "One can't live the afternoon of one's life according to the rules of the morning." Right? Because what was great in the morning will be of little importance in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And what in the morning was true in the evening will have become lies. So that quote has resonated for me, still resonates for me. because I find that we shift. So, and we're not talking about chronological age, right? Because of course you have a physical age, chronological, numerical age, but it's stages of life. So some of us go through these existential questions perhaps in our 40s, some in our 50s, some in our 60s, etc. So in my conversations, Kirti, with people on aging, I find people fall into 4 categories.
Share those with me if you're okay with that.
Yeah, I've made this up myself, so there you go. My research.
That's when I started, right? Yeah.
So the first category of people are those I call the deniers. They're the ones who say, no, everything's the same. I'm the same. It doesn't matter what age I am. I'm just going to motor on. So that's one group. And then the second group are the fighters. They're the people who say, yes, I know I'm aging and I'm going to do everything I can to fight it, right? I'm going to eat well, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to do Botox and drugs, chemicals, you give it, ice bucket.
There's a word women use for that one. I'm going to keep quiet. All right. And the third one.
The third one are the inevitables. They're the people who say, listen, it's happening. I'm just going to go with it, right? So I'm not turning a certain age. I'm going to behave in a certain way. I'm going to dress in a certain way. There's nothing I can do about it.
Okay.
The fourth category are those people I call the engagers. And they're the people who engage in, okay, so what does this mean for me? What do these shifts, what do these transitions translate into my life? Because really, that's what they are. They are all transitions.
You mentioned there are 4, right? Can there be a mixture in between?
Of course, yes. And there'll be a mix of those or none of the others. Yeah, those are just things I've just made up. I just find it's an easy, when you talk about it for people, most people can go, oh, which one am I?
I was actually my best friend.
Yeah.
He kind of blends between 2, the denial and the second stage. I'm like, oh, you're denying it. And he's like, no. And I'm like, yeah, you kind of look like you're denying this aging. But it's a nice category to put people in a way, just to get them thinking and reflecting. So if somebody feels they're denying it, how do you convert about conscious aging to someone who denies? Is there any?
I'm not into converting. I don't believe. I don't want to convert anyone. I am interested in raising the conversation and the consciousness for people to think about it. So if you think about it, Kirti, when we go through life, we have many transition points. So when we are younger, it's quite evident, like moving from a baby to a young child, to a teenager, to a young adult. Those life stages are very prominent. And then you kind of go into this bulk of life, right? And, the most of your life. And because we have now lost, I think, some of those major transition points towards the latter part of our lives, e.g. retirement, etc., those transition things happen to us and we don't quite know how to deal with it. So Bruce Feiler, in his book called Life is in the Transition, calls them lifequakes.
Okay.
So examples of lifequakes are things like menopause, empty nesting, redundancy, death of parents, death of a partner, health issues, divorce. So all these things that come along and suddenly shake you up, and the choice then becomes, well, what do I do with this, right? How do I deal with it? And all transitions, Kirti, have 3 stages. There is always the ending, then what is the messy middle, and then the new beginning. Now, this messy middle can last anything from 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, or whatever in that. So it's your framework, right? It's your mindset on how do I understand these transitions? How do I understand what I'm going through now? Actually, it's perfectly normal.
I was thinking about, you were talking about transitions. Is there a form? I don't know if it's just you, but I noticed that there's always a bit of grieving along the way in these
Of
transitions.
course,
And
yes.
you go
And
through
that's part.
5 stages of it.
Yeah. So, if you look at Kubler-Ross's grieving model, five
Yes.
stages of grief, so whenever anything ends, of course, there's a level of grieving because you're giving up on something.
Mhm.
Something has finished, right? You will never be able to get that back. So, of course, there's a period of grieving that we need to go through, and we need to allow ourselves to do that. Because again, if we're denying that, it'll
Mhm.
just keep coming back. And I find that life has this very peculiar way of grabbing your attention. It gives you a little tap along the way. And if you don't pay much attention, it taps you even harder. And then if you don't pay attention, it comes along and gives you a big whack. It's, hey,
Do you have a personal moment you can share that happened to you?
I can talk about a friend of mine I was speaking to just last week.
Mhm.
He had an issue with his shoulder 12 months ago, and he kind of got that sorted. And then he had an issue with his back. And then a few months ago, he's had to go in to have operations because he's had some issues with his kidneys,
Oh, wow.
right?
Hmm.
And I said to him, listen, this is 12 months you've been going through. If you don't do some changes, if you don't do some shifts, something is going to hit you really hard.
So
And,
is he in the denial phase, or he
he's
is?
in the denial and fighter. He's in that kind of, I'm fine. I don't have to pay attention to it. And then in some ways also, when I spoke to him last week, or I saw him, he was also he was in the inevitable, or this is part of aging, or this is part of growing old.
Mhm.
Then not necessarily. It's like, how do you deal with it? So it's getting people to kind of understand that. I've lived in Melbourne. My wife and I, my family, I've lived in Melbourne for the last 35 years.
Okay.
And 2 years ago, when we were doing a retreat, my wife came to the retreat as a participant. And she had this
A conscious aging retreat.
a
Okay.
conscious aging retreat, right? And she had this epiphany of a question. And the question was, what's happened to that young woman who came out from England with a backpack, sense of adventure, spontaneous, level of fun? What's
Mhm.
happened to that person? Okay. And of course, you know what happens. You get older, you get married, you get kids, you get a job, you get mortgage. It's like boom, 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 boom. So it's like a babushka doll.
Yeah.
Upon layers upon layers upon layers. And of course, the core is always there.
Mhm.
But what happens is if you don't allow time for that, it just gets clouded over. So one of the things we then did was our daughter lives in Perth. And
Mhm.
over the pandemic, because we were in lockdown for such long periods, we didn't get a chance to see her. She couldn't travel, we couldn't travel, etc. And so my wife was keen to spend more time with her because I don't think she'll come back to Melbourne. She really likes Perth, and she's been here for about 5 years now. So we said, look, why don't we go over and spend some time in Perth, right? Because we can. So that's the other thing, because physically we can. We're still able. We can still move because it takes a lot of effort to move, as you would know. So we decided, let's do it for 12 months. So we came for 12 months. We just finished the 12-month period last month, and we've decided to extend for another 12,
Oh, that's beautiful.
right? All that is being conscious. And there were periods last year, Kirti, when I asked myself, oh God, what have I done? Why am I doing it? Where's my network? Where are my friends? All those things that you just take for granted. Because in a new place, you actually have to lean in and make an effort.
Does that make you more conscious? By having
Yes.
all that you're comfortable with just drop away, and there's that crisis you talk about, or that transition, like, now what? Because that's
Now
kind of like
what?
a divorce from the old life, right? Or an
That's
old
correct.
period in your life.
An old period, an old identity. So you have to it's part of your identity. You have to let that go and say, okay, now what am I here what am I being, who am I being, how am I showing up? And really, an advantage of that is you can make up who you want to be, right, to a certain extent, because you can drop your identity. So one of the challenges, for instance, just switching from that to when people retire, okay, and especially they've been so identified with their roles, and this is very also kind of quite gender specific. Lots of men have this, like they're part of their role, they retire, they leave their jobs, and suddenly they find, oh, I've got no friends here to go with. I've got no one, I don't feel important. What do I do? Where's my purpose, etc.? So you need to kind of fill those things in. Whereas I think generally speaking, and I am generalizing here, women are much better networked. They speak more, they share more with their friends, so there's much more support to it to help them with it. Whereas for men, a lot of men don't have that support.
I know when I've had male clients, and I have to say the hardest part, it is a hard part for them to struggle to open up. There's almost like this. It is like an identity. I'm not allowed to do that, or there's so much conditioning from the past. You have to, you allow them to unpack, and then they go, oh, but I can say this, or I can't. They have to find their own new vocabulary to go forward. And you said something very interesting about retiring. More and more retirement is now moved later.
Correct.
Is part of that to do with this crisis of like, okay, if I retire, my whole life has been defined by my work. Now what? What suggestions can you offer? I mean, other than I want them to come on your retreat now, but what else?
Well, so firstly, it's actually getting an appreciation that we are living longer. Okay, so we are living longer. So, but most of us now will live till our 80s. So that's called lifespan. So if you think of retiring, let's say someone retires at 60 or 65, right? And they're going to live till they're 85. That's another 20 years. Right? What are you going to be doing in those 20? From just a very practical point of view. So you've got lifespan. The other thing that we want to be just much more conscious of is what is known as health span. So just because you are living longer, if you don't have the quality of life, like that's a waste. So you need to be thinking about, how do I maintain things like physical strength? How do I maintain a level of agility so that I can actually move through life without a lot of, because I understand that physically I am going to get older, I am going to get weaker.
As well, yes.
But what are some of the things I can do? So, it's like health span and lifespan. And Becca Levy is a gerontologist who's at Yale University. Her research has suggests that if just by changing our mindset about aging, we can gain an extra 7.5 years.
Yeah.
So if we look at aging as positive.
Yeah. Aging, it's also very much mindset. But if you're having, I'm thinking back of that the way you've broken down to the different kind of individuals they are and the different behavior patterns, either they deny it or they engage with it and everything. And you get closer to what has been told society, 60, you retire, or now it's a little longer.
Yep. Now 65, 67.
Is there anything that can be done to bring the consciousness more forward? Let's say in the workspace, because I notice in the workspace, we talk a lot about millennials, but the conversation for mid-careers forwards, there is a crisis. Like, okay, I've given all my life to work. Now what? Given all my life to family. Now what? What do you think is the missing conversation? What conversation can we start having to get us into that conscious mindset?
So again, we live, I think, today in a very youth-oriented society.
Explain.
Which means we're preoccupied with the youth. It's about, because of the technology, the changes. We are very much admiring. We want to stay young. Okay, given rather than embracing what are some of the benefits of getting older. We don't talk about those things. Someone said as a joke, if aging was a tourist destination, no one would go there.
I have heard this one, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So because it's not something we aspire to, when really, if you think about it, it's such a blessing. It's such a blessing
Yeah.
to age.
When I talk to younger generations, or they go, Kirti, don't you miss out what we go through? And I'm thinking, I don't want to be your age. I loved my 80s. I loved getting into the car and my mom not finding
Yeah.
me anywhere. I love the fact that I didn't have tech, but the music was great too. And then people go, so do you enjoy? I said, I love aging. I just enjoy it. It's beautiful, I feel.
Yeah. Because it helps us look at life through different lenses. We appreciate different things that were probably important for us in our 20s or 30s. When you get into your 50s and 60s, you go, well, it's not that important. And so the bigger questions, that's why we talk about the existential questions around, what can I in fact give back? How do I become an elder? How do I value that? So to your question of the workplace, we spend very little time honoring those people, because we go, oh, you're old. What used to work in your days, they don't work today because we are quick and fast and hip, and et cetera, rather than appreciating one thing that research shows as you get older is you increase your ability to recognize patterns. So pattern recognition, a sense of wisdom, being able to say, oh, I've seen this before, or we've been through this before. And these are some of the things we did, compared to someone who says, oh, let's do it quicker and faster and be more efficient, because there are times when you just need to pause.
Yeah. I say positivity over positivity. That's me.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think of decision making in teams, decision making in groups, right?
Very different, yeah.
Decisions are always enhanced when you have social decision making processes. You have more people involved, and there is loads of research that shows intergenerational teams outperform monogenerational teams because you have different perspectives.
I always think if you can be an Indian in an Indian family, you know how to be in a team sometimes, because you're working with different intergenerational. Your decision making is dependent on your elders, your parents, your siblings that are younger than you, if you have them, your cousins, people of your cousins, the married people. It's like a whole thing going together. And when I look at teams, I go, well, this is not really that far off. So I do agree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But when I go into organizations, it is a conversation between getting on board the younger generation and getting those who are in their 60s and going to redefining themselves. What conversation could take place that is not a tick in the box either, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. So if you think about the drivers of someone who's in their 20s, starting a career, look at the motivation that those individuals will have compared to someone who's in their 60s. The motivations are different. The drivers are different. And you will find that most people in their 60s, they still want to work. Now, they don't want to work in the same manner and at the same pace that they used to work years ago, but they want to have a level of involvement because it keeps them engaged. They want to be able to contribute. They may want to just work part-time. They may want to be in roles of being a mentor, a coach, a guide, a sage on the side. So it's all about looking at how do we perhaps reconfigure things. And it's also in having an appreciation that what value can someone who is older bring? So I may not have the physical strength, but there are other things I can bring. So what are some of those things? And how can we utilize them? So it's actually engaging in those conversations.
And how can you engage in a conversation if you met? I'm thinking back on a conversation I had with someone in the field of law.
Yep,
And she's feeling she has to move into another job because her boss, she was like, my boss is not retiring anytime soon.
yep,
And I said, well, maybe he is, but maybe there's this redefinition of aging. They're finding their purpose. She goes, no, he just doesn't want to share his knowledge because he's afraid. What is his purpose once he shares that? So I know you
that's
said
right.
being a coach and a mentor and a guide, that's sharing knowledge, but there is
Yes,
resistance there. And how do we work
yep.
with that resistance in the
Yeah,
conversation?
so I find that interesting hearing that, Kirti, because I think that is so old school. That thing about knowledge is power. I'm going to hang on to knowledge. When there is so much knowledge now in the world, you can access anything you want on the internet, right? So if you think of stages of knowledge, what you have at the base is just data, right? That's all you have. You have data. The data then transforms into information. Information transforms into knowledge. Knowledge transforms into wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So information by itself is useless. It's like, what do I do with it? And that needs knowledge, right? And
Yeah.
then that comes wisdom. So I think it is sad when I hear a story like that, someone trying to hang on to it, rather than being generous, is having a level of generosity and saying, how do I share this? How do I bring others up? All boats rise in the high tide. So that's a mindset. Right? So I'm not saying that. So this is the whole thing. We don't all embark and embrace aging. Some of us find it very difficult to do it because our identity is so linked to it. Our professional identity is so linked to it, and we may have, people may have other issues, other challenges.
Has there anything surprised you? I mean, you're also a diversity consultant plus this. I'm curious because how does that differ in culture as well, the way they approach aging? Because if I hear Dutch communities, for example, some of them are quite happy. They're like, I'm going to retire when I'm 60 and I'm going to do this. They have a different approach to it. And then when I
Yep.
think about my elders from the Asian, from my Indian tapestry, they're like, I'm not going to retire. I'm going to work till I'm like, till the last day.
Yep. Yep. Because it's really what is the value attached to the work. So for most times, so I find that example of the Indian person who's going to say, I'm going to work till my last day, is because it gives me something to do. I'm engaged, right? So if you look at any of the work that has come out of Stanford, Paul Pizzo's work, he talks about the three things that you need for healthy aging. One is purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Two is community, and three is physical and mental well-being.
Yeah.
So for most people, Kirti, we get our purpose from work,
Is it most
right?
people or
So
is it a particular gender though?
it may be a particular gender, but it gives people a reason to get up,
Yeah.
right? So people may complain a lot about their work, but it gives them a reason to get up.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes what you find, people who've retired and they go, the first phase of retirement is always what we call a vacation. And that can last for a year. You got plenty of time. I don't have to do anything. I can sleep in. But then how much do you want to sleep in, right? So you need something to get you up. That's purpose. You need community. You need to have people that you can hang out with. So one of the challenges that happens for us as we age is our friendship circles decline.
Yeah.
Okay? We don't have, especially if we're not working, because we meet a lot of our friends at work, so that declines. And if you are not in groups or clubs or settings, your friendship groups just become less. And then the third thing is it impacts your mental and physical well-being. So even though people say, "Oh, I love staying on my own. I don't want to move into aged care, etc., etc." But if you don't have connections, you become very lonely.
I can see that. I noticed that also loneliness gets you closer to your death. I know it sounds
Yes,
not
yes,
that people don't like to talk about, but when I speak to elders and I notice that they're so lonely, there's a sense of giving up. Like, oh, why should I go out?
yes,
Why should I do this or why should I do that?
yeah. So it becomes inevitable, right? Because of what value am I now? What importance am I? I have done already. I have served, which is why one of the reasons in Asian cultures, with the traditional Asian cultures where it was multi-generational, like what you said, that Indian fact, multi-generational. Everybody has a role. Everybody has a role. Even the old grandfather, the grandmother, they have a role. And it may be just to sit in the chair. But there is a role, and there's a value to it. Whereas you find here in the Western kind of cultures, we raise our families, and then people leave, and then most people downsize to a smaller place, and then downsize to retirement villages or lifestyle villages, etc., so that they are meeting other people, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
One of the downsides of that is you're hanging out with people who are also of the same generation, right? I mean, multi-generationals are good because it makes you think differently. It challenges some of your thinking. You may not agree with all of it, but it's useful to have a different way or different perspective.
There's two things that have coming to mind. One is that there's supermarkets now. They got so, made us in the Netherlands, they've made an aisle just for people who want to talk. So the elderly who are struggling with the technology, go in and just beep 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 everything. They've actually made it, and they've put on the sign there: expect to wait. If you don't
Okay.
expect it to be quick or fast, because people genuinely like, how are you, and they want to talk, they want to
I
interact.
want to talk.
And I think that's a
Yes.
beautiful initiative. And the other one
Yeah.
was in the Netherlands. I think they younger generations get the incentive to have their housing taken care of if they take a couple of hours out of their day to go to senior homes, which I think is so
Right.
beautiful because they get to do fun stuff and everything.
Yeah.
Do you think that we're, in a way, I like how you talk about community, but do you think that we're neglecting this joyfulness in our life from the multi-generational perspective? Can we add value or remind all generations that this is also consciousness?
Absolutely. So one of the things that all of us fail to appreciate, Kirti, is all of us are aging.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? Like today is the youngest you'll ever be, and today is the oldest you'll ever be, right? Because tomorrow you'll be older. So you're the youngest that you'll ever be. So because tomorrow you're going to be older. So ageism, which is the attitude of we discriminate against age, how we think, how we feel, how we act towards people. Ageism is something that all of us have. All of us are ageist. We just need to catch ourselves thinking about, oh, that person can't do that because they're too old. Or how many times have we said, oh, I just had a senior's moment, right? I
When
can't
do you
find
see
my
that?
keys. I
I
just had
haven't
a, right?
experienced.
Oh, I forgot to do that. Oh, I just can't remember. So these are all way. Oh, that must be.
Well, we
I
call
must be
this a
getting old.
menopause moment in my age. We'll go, it's a menopause.
Well, that's right. So the thing is, like we are ageist against ourselves rather than appreciating. Okay, how do I understand that these are things that I need to embrace? These are some of the shifts that will occur. Of course, I may forget certain things, but I'll remember other things, etc.
It's almost like you're saying that if you practice consciousness or acceptance, I always think consciousness has this sort of unspoken acceptance. You go, you just take it all in and go, okay, this is it, this is it.
Yeah.
And I work with a lot of women who are struggling at the moment. This is the moment that presents itself. who are struggling in their 30s that they have to start thinking about their body. So they start actually thinking about the aging of the body at 30, because if I don't put my eggs away, I'm going to have a, I'm not going to have a kid, my body won't take it. It's a lot of stress right there. But how can you approach that acceptance from your perspective? You do this conscious aging. They don't have to start at 60 or 59. How can we bring that conscious aging earlier into the stages of life without feeling too serious about it, if you know what I mean?
Yes. So if I'm hearing you correctly, is how do we have this conversation earlier for people? How do we get this on the agenda? So the challenge with that, Kirti, is that most people, generalizing, and most people don't think about aging until they get to a stage where it becomes important. So, e.g., your example of women in their 30s having to think of their bodies, do I have to freeze my eggs, etc., etc. They only start thinking about that because suddenly there's a time pressure.
Time pressure, yes.
Right? Time pressure. So suddenly there's an external force that kind of drives that. Or if you think about the midlife crisis of people saying, I'm going to change everything, I'm going to change this, that, etc., because it suddenly people go, oh, wow, I'm halfway through my life, and all those things I thought I would do, I'm not going to do. Mm-hmm. So, how do I do things differently? So it creates this that need to do something different. And we want to, what is useful is to get people to appreciate that, look, these are just stages of life. Mm-hmm. And if you work, for instance, if you work in the IT industry, mm-hmm. which is very much geared towards fast-paced, quick, intensity, etc., in the IT industry, people burn out quickly, right? They age quickly.
Yes.
Many people get to a certain age and go, listen, it's just too much for me. I can't keep up with it, and I'm not interested. Because, I was interested when I was in my early 20s to learn the latest programs, find out what's happening across, etc. When I'm in my 40s, I think, how interested am I? So many people, for instance, it's possible to be an elder when you're 40 in the IT industry or in sport.
Yeah. Sport.
Right? You become an elder.
Yeah.
Because, it's so much geared towards that whole physicality.
So is it fair to say that actually around your 40s, you start in the redefinition phase?
Yes, usually starts then, because that's when your body also starts going through some changes, whether you're a man or a woman, right? Yeah, all of us. Yeah, we start thinking, I may not be as strong, as fit, as fast. My body recovery from having a big night out, all those things that kind of used to be able to do really easily. Suddenly you're having to just. So it makes us pause.
Men's midlife crisis, okay? And I'm smiling because I'm thinking, my best friend is I always say, you're having a midlife crisis. He's like, oh, Kirti, shall I do something differently, or shall I dress different? And I'm like, why can't you just not embrace yourself right now? What suggestion could I give him, for example? If he listens to this, he's going to kill me for asking.
But the question though becomes, what is it, or why is he asking himself those questions? No. Right? You find most times it'll be the societal pressure. It's what other people expect, okay? Because you need to be a certain way, or this is how you should be. Think of the number of women who are under pressure to go, well, I need to be younger, I need to be looking good, I need to be using, the anti-aging business, Kirti, is worth billions.
Huge, big.
Billions, big, huge.
Yeah. And unhealthy big. The coloring. I know I get a lot of compliments on my hair, and everybody always says, do you do that on purpose? And I'm thinking, no, this is just me. I don't need to put this, because the moment you start, for me, I feel like I'm denying the beautiful process of aging. I guess maybe that's the yoga roots that tells you, hey, Kirti, you were born, but there's also the ending of the physical body.
Yes.
Having that in my process has been very helpful because you get a level of acceptance. So when I see people struggle with all this, and the beauty industry is massive, we've also noticed recently a pattern that, at least with women, because currently I'm working with women, is that
Yep.
there's an exhaustion of having to be always continuously trying to look young. Doesn't
Yep.
conditioning, the way we've been conditioned, play a huge role in all this? So
Yes.
how do you
Yes.
consciousness just to that? Because
It's
that's a lot to break at 48 or
that's a yes.
isn't it?
Yes. The messaging that comes from all around us, it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult. So even when we talk about conscious aging, I have come across people who are in their 60s, 70s who go, I don't want to talk about aging.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it. And so I spoke to someone recently. He was 73. And the question I asked him was, have you spoken to your partner about death?
Mhm.
E.g., what are some of the last wishes? He said, no. I said, well, why not? Oh, no, we don't want to discuss it. I said, you're 73, right? I, you will die one day. I said, I hate to pass bad news on to you. But it's like, oh, no, we don't want to discuss it. So I think all that, there's a whole fear about discussing. There's a whole thing about let's not even talk about any of these things because they are kind of touchy subjects, etc. Whereas I think if you are much more aware and attuned to this, you go, this is part of life, right? Like this too, we will pass through this. Like this is one phase that we are in, and we too will go from here. And if you think about legacy, how many generations we get remembered for, etc. The question really is like, so how can I leave? How can I leave the world a better place? Like that's an existential question, right?
Mhm.
What's the best thing I can do in the period I have here? And depending on what philosophical bend you go with, some people would argue, all of us have a soul, we have a journey,
Mhm.
we come here to learn different things, and then we leave, right? Wayne Dyer said that years and years ago, we are all spiritual beings having a human experience,
Experience. Yeah, it is.
right? So, I think all this becomes points or topics of conversations around, okay, like, what does this mean and how do I navigate? Because it is a navigation, and there is no one way of aging. Like everyone does it differently. So how do I embark on this? How do I embrace this? How do I, for instance, understand? For instance, there was a book written, The Five Biggest Regrets of People Who Are Dying,
Yes.
okay, by this lady called Bonnie Ware. And one of the regrets was, I regret not keeping up my friendships. Okay, not keeping up. Just that's one of the top five, right? So if I'm conscious of that, and I go, yeah, well, that's a regret. So if I don't want to have that, what are some of the things I can do to either maintain my friendships or ensure that I have a friendship group? Because it's going to take effort, right? Like these things don't just happen. They takes effort.
Yeah, I my existential. I see my now I'm tongue rolling here, but my crisis happened in not a crisis. It was a beautiful moment. I was invited to support someone in their passing,
Yep.
and I remember
Yes.
sitting with this gentleman, and I was like, the wife said, "Can you give him yoga?" And I'm like, "Gentleman's passing away. The best that I can do is give him relaxation and breathing, which is actually yoga." And funnily
Yep.
enough, the last posture you do in yoga is called shavasana, which is, if you
That's right.
translate
Yeah.
it, the kids used to call it dead man's pose. And
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
is, it's surrendering from your body, because your body's like a vehicle. So with
Yep.
this gentleman, it was giving him this technique. And one moment he stopped me and he goes, "Have I really lived life?" And I was like, it's a very profound question for me. I'm like,
Mm.
I'm thinking I can live forever and ever, amen. But actually, no, I realized that I could be in that position any second.
And yeah.
And so I remembered after that, I lost a lot in my life. I just went into a vacuum for a moment of emptiness. And I got, I have to say, that was existential.
Yes,
This word,
existential. Yes,
existential.
yes.
And I asked myself, if my last day happened and I look back on my life, will I regret anything? And that has been a huge changeover. But the moment I share this story with somebody, it's like they don't want to hear it. And I go,
Yes.
how do I support somebody to understand that this moment really matters? And I always think that is that conversation I haven't seen many people have still today.
Correct. To this day. So, there's a group of monks who have it as part of their daily mantra, this memento mori, right? Which is keep death daily in front of you.
Yes.
So it's exactly to your point. Wake up and go, I have another day. I haven't died. What do I make? How do I make the most of today? Okay. And talking about consciousness, I came across the work of someone called Margaret Wheatley many years ago. And in her book, she wrote about consciousness. And she says a flea has consciousness. A dog has consciousness. Human beings have consciousness. But it's different levels of consciousness, right? A dog is much more conscious than a flea. Humans are much more conscious than a dog. But within humans, there are levels of consciousness.
Yes.
Right? So not everybody is going to be conscious. Like some people are just not that. So, to your earlier question right at the start, when you said, how do I convince somebody who's a denier? I'm not here to convince anybody. This is a journey I'm on for myself. And I want to engage other people who are also interested in it.
So,
Talk about it.
It very nicely into what do we do on that retreat of yours that you've been not sharing? Now you're sharing it more loudly. I want to hear more.
Well, the retreat, so the sort of conversations we are having, Kirti, you can see lends itself to an immersion, right? A deep dive, because it's very difficult to have this conversation, because it brings up a lot of different ways of thinking. It brings up, okay, I haven't thought about that. Or what about this? Let me think, so because you're also delving into your own life experiences, and we all have our own little invisible backpack of experiences that we carry with us that informs how we look at the world.
Yeah.
Some of these are useful and some of these are not. Some of these things we need to let go. We need to shed. We need to drop. But to do that, you need to have time to look at it and say, actually, that doesn't serve me anymore.
Yeah.
I need to let that go. And that only comes when you are in what I call a community of where it's okay to explore those things, to have authentic conversations.
Can anyone join your retreat?
Yeah, so Chip Conley is a man who wrote the book called Wisdom at Work. And his latest book just came out 2 months ago called 12 Reasons to Love Midlife. He started the world's first midlife wisdom school about 5 years ago in Baja, California, because he suddenly realized he lost a number of his friends in their 40s who kind of committed suicide because, they kind of didn't feel it was worth it. And he had some of his own experiences that had him think about, gosh, we don't have schools or places that teach us how do we navigate this crisis? Or what is known as crisis? How do I navigate this? So what's the next stage of my life? I've been doing this thing as a professional for the last 30 years, right? Suddenly, I'm getting up and I'm not getting the buzz out of it.
Yeah.
What do I do?
That sense of motivation, joy.
Yeah, joy. How do I do that? How do I do it differently? How do I take the courage to try something new? How do I become a learner?
Yeah.
Again, which is difficult to do. Right? It's difficult.
Indian communities always say, as I grow older, I don't want to learn anything new.
Exactly. Which
I
is
don't, I'm
poor.
like,
That's terrible.
I'm like, really? And then you're like, leave me alone. I've lived life already. And you're like, you're still living. But that's the banter. I think that's also a
That's a
joyful
banter.
banter to have with them, because you get to, especially with if they're older and they're your loved ones, you go, come on, and you go.
Yeah, yeah. You can push it. You can, etc. So when I went, for instance, he has the Modern Elder Academy. They run retreats on a regular basis in their retreat Baja, and also now in Santa Fe, and I've attended their retreats, and it's magical. A beautiful place surrounded with a group of people who are all exploring and interested in this, right? And everyone's different stages of life exploring it, but everyone has their own reasons for wanting to think about, okay, how do I do this? So when I ran this retreat I'm doing with my colleague Fiona Hyde, who's a yoga teacher. So she focuses on the yoga because we think it's important to be flexible in your body, flexibility of mind, as you would know. 4 years ago, when we ran a pilot program for this, one of the participants in the group came in and she wrote an article about it. She said, where being in this space, it was over a 6-week period, helped her realize she wasn't happy with what she was doing. She was an IT person. She was in her late 50s, but she wasn't sure that she had enough courage, money, time, status, to go and do what she wanted to do, which was to write books, children's books. Okay? But being in this space allowed her to do that. She took, she had the courage to step into the next chapter of her life. And she's flourishing. Took a few years to get her, her feet together, but now 4 years on, she's had a number of books published, etc. So she's a success story. It's in the same way. Numerous people I've seen who've changed careers, changed their way, changed places. Because until and unless you do something, it'll be the same. And what consciousness does, I think one of the great things about mortality is it helps you realize time is finite. There is an end point. We just don't know when it is, but there is an end point.
Talking about the end point, I think that's a nice way to round it up.
Great segue. Great segue, Kirti.
But a quick thing. Can you share when's your next retreat? How can we find you?
We're doing, of course, a retreat. We're doing, of course, a retreat in Australia, in Byron Bay, in April 2024. That's the one that we have coming up, and then we are looking at doing another one next year in March in Bali, in Indonesia. That's when we're looking at it. And I'd love to come and do one over in Europe. I mean, it's again.
I'm happy to get that hosted. We're going to do that next. I'm going to put all your
Actually, we should talk about that.
Yes, we are going to talk about that one. That's going to be my next phase. But thank you, Tom, for sharing. I will put all the links in the comments so audience knows where to find you. But I'm really happy because you are also the first person who's going to be talking about the men's health on my podcast. So I feel very blessed. Let me put it that way. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure, and great joy to be here. Thank you for having me. It's been great fun.
It has been. And it's nice to have a conversation that complete. It actually cheered me up today. So I'm going to keep it with that. Thank you.
That's good. Take care.